Welcome to the Misfit Squad podcast,
where we invite you to embrace your difference and to discover a spectrum of possibilities and change what's wrong about you into what is strong about you.
Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Misfit Squad podcast. Today we're talking about coping with an anxious child. So we're still in the middle of massive change occurring in the world everywhere today. So massive changes, routines, during times of massive change, that is, routines and schedules often become in flux, as we're also well aware of right now. And that creates anxiety and stress and overwhelm. And then those run rapidly sort of over time in our kids' systems. And we actually also don't often realize how much stress kids can experience and how much pressure they can be under. They're sort of very masterful at hiding their stress. And they don't know what stress is. They're not going to describe it as stress. So childhood anxiety can develop into a much greater concern if children don't know how to cope. Really, that's how we start seeing acting out and upset, bad quote unquote bad behaviors, etc., right? So really, if your child's acting out, what are they anxious about? What are they stressed out about? So we've got for you today a bunch of techniques and phrases to help them deal with anxiety and help them recognize that that's what it is.
Yes.
Yeah. And there are several, might be too many, but there are some different types of anxiety that Trina is going to give us a bunch more information about.
Yes. So it's kind of like what Kim said. A lot of times kids it's what we would call invisible overwhelm, where they just go into overwhelm, but they don't really know why. Or they may be experiencing stuff and they even may be experiencing physical things like stomach aches or headaches, but they don't know why. So part of it can show up. That's a part of it can be anxiety or stress. So I'm just going to break down the different kind of forms of childhood anxiety. And this is also for adults, but generalized anxiety is really the most common disorder. And that's where children worry about things like school, like their family, the future. And besides it being a looming sense of dread, physical symptoms may manifest like headaches, stomach aches, muscle tension, and tiredness. So that's your generalized anxiety. And then there's OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. And there kids express their anxiety through obsessions and compulsions. And and there's also phobias, which are a really intense fear about certain situations or things like clowns or being in small spaces. I mean, some kids have phobias about bugs. And there's also social anxiety. And this is triggered when you're in front of groups of people or in big situations. And a couple other ones are panic attacks. And these anxiety episodes a lot of times can happen without warning. Physical symptoms that children can experience are like a pounding heart rate, shortness of breath, dizziness, numbness, or tingling feelings. That's for panic attacks. And then the other one is PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And that's usually anxiety that stems from a prior traumatic experience. And a lot of times that includes things like flashbacks, nightmares, fears, and an avoidance of that traumatic event in their present time.
I just want to, I just add a little bit for the PTSD part? I just want to point out that also sounds and smells, I think are one, when I'm thinking about kids, it could even be something as simple as an adult, really screamed at them for something, right? And then scared them. And there's a certain sort of tone to that voice, or there's a smell that was happening. It can be randomly some other time the kid hears someone's talking that sounds like that person, and instantaneously the body is back in that fight or flight sort of trauma. So
Yep.
those are other triggers. If it seems sudden, like,
That's a really good cue. And like it's the fight or flight, or sometimes they even freeze.
yeah,
So it's being aware of all of those, but mostly, like, especially now in this time with all the flux and the changes of like routines and being able to hang out with friends and not being able to hang out with friends, you're going to see more of the generalized anxiety. So that's why we just want to give you a few tips and tools and phrases that you as parents or caretakers can use to help in those situations.
yeah. So what do you want to start with a physical? Well, we'll start with this one. So we basically have like a few questions that you can ask, right? So you essentially have a calm conversation. So really, actually, let's back it up a step and say that the first step is for you to take a breath and to manage your own anxiety and pulse rate.
Yes. And
right?
you can't try to fix or change something in the middle of like an intense situation. I mean, yes, we can give these phrases which will help tone it down, but you can't try to like fix something when you're in that fight or flight. So this is also taking that breath and being aware of something, and hopefully being aware maybe a little bit before it explodes into something even bigger.
Right. But the reason I say it's important, like, I don't know if I've talked about this or if you know, but like I teach writing lessons mostly to little kids. And I get anxious. Like I feel the physical symptoms of anxiety when the kids are really afraid or anxious, or if a horse gets really afraid or anxious, like I physically, so I have to regularly, like when a horse is freaking out or a kid is freaking out, the first thing I have to do is like breathe in and like breathe out. And I sort of imagine like all of this weight coming off of my body into the ground, which lowers my heart rate. If you're really amped up in with your kid's anxiety, it's going to be difficult, right? Because we automatically, to some degree, match or mirror the energies of the people around us, right? We've sort of talked about that, and that I think that's particularly true when it comes to anxiety. So the first thing that you can really do is not be upset, not be stressed out, be really calm, and manage your own heart rate. And then, right? Would you agree, Trina?
Oh, it totally, because you can't, that's why I'm saying you can't try to change the situation when you're like going crazy. And the other part of that too, which we have talked about in many previous shows, is really about expanding your own space. And you can also expand your child. So we can kind of go over that really quick.
Right. And I could you feel it, Trina? Like you were aware when I was saying that. Did you feel the energy of the space change? So if you're not sure what we're talking about, back it up like a minute and listen again. And this time pay attention to what you notice in your body. And if you might have to listen to it a few times, but you'll then get what I'm talking about. And you'll see how you listening to me say, take a breath, let all of the troubles wash off and lower your pulse rate. You'll notice your body doing that. You listening to me do that will help you do that. And so it's the same thing when you're interacting with your children or not your children. If you're a caregiver and this does not just apply to like a parent-child relationship.
This is even in any coworker and in any relationship, really. When anxiety or stress is high. That said, like Kim said, you take that deep breath, and it's really like one thing that I have done a lot when working with kids who, their heart rate's beating really fast, they're breathing really fast, and you can just tell that they're have a lot going on, is be the space that Kim's talking about but then you also, it's almost like perceiving that they're in this like bubble or box that's like, oh, I got way too much going on, and you are actually expanding the edges of that bubble and making it bigger so they have a greater space, so then they can actually breathe deeper and their heart rate starts to decrease. So it's the same thing, it's expanding your zone.
Right. So this first question that we have to suggest sort of fits perfectly with that. And that is, you know, what you want to say to the person freaking out is, let's pretend we're going to blow up a giant balloon. We're going to take a deep breath and blow it up to the count of 5. So here's the thing. Trying to tell a kid or a person to take a deep breath in the midst of an attack, that's not probably going to go so well. They're going to scream, yell, say, I can't, etc. So the balloon, let's blow up a giant balloon, let's blow up a beach ball, whatever, basically makes it a game. So essentially what we're doing here is we're making it a game out of taking a deep breath, right? So pretend you're going to blow up the bubble, make funny faces, you know, and you want to do it like 3 times. So we're going to take 3 deep breaths. We're going to breathe in, breathe out, blow up that bubble. And so the breathing in and the blowing out actually starts to reverse the stress response. That's a tongue twister in the body. And then the other extra piece that Trina and I like about this is we have a similar exercise where we blow out the stuff that isn't working for us or isn't bothering us into the bubble. And then once the bubble's really big, then you just pop it. And the kids like that too.
Kids love that. Yeah. I did it one time. I've done it many times, but one time I was doing it, this kid was like on overwhelm and just almost like running around everywhere, but at the same time being super anxious. And I was like, hey, what if we took everything that's bothering you and we're going to blow up this balloon and we're going to stick it all in there. So we started saying things and sticking things in there. And then he's like, oh yeah. And my iPad, my sister always steals my iPad and it makes me so mad. And so like he threw the iPad in there and then we like blew it all up and then we popped it. And it was really cool to watch him just like come down.
Yeah. And then also the other cool part about the popping is if you actually, you know, pop it and slap your hands together, it does create also like there's a real physical sensation in the clapping of your hands together that interrupts
the nerve response.
Yes.
Neurological response.
That's the word. I was like, I was thinking of like neuron processors. I'm like, that's not right. The neurological response. There we go.
Also, what you call proprioception, which is deep pressure input, which is also calming because it's input to the joints. Yeah. So then they feel more of where their body is in space, which helps also decrease the stress.
All right. So number 2 in the ask them a calming question is, if how you feel was a monster, what would it look like? Or what monster would it be? So this is essentially like giving a characterization to the anxiety. So it means that you take a confusing feeling and make it concrete and palpable. So, but in a third party sort of way. Right? So it allows them to sort of like step over here and look in, and without being in the feelings, identify the feelings so that then you can then address the feelings essentially, right? So once then you have the character, you know, let's say it's the Cookie Monster, right? Essentially like, or maybe Groucho.
The Scrooge.
Anyways. Once they have like a worry character, then they can talk about it. Like, oh, well, you know, like it allows you to have a conversation that helps them work through it
Yeah, it allows them,
Yeah.
it allows them to be able to look at their feeling and be with it, rather than it almost like, it's almost like taking it outside of their body and allowing them to like really be with it versus like having it in them, which is creating all of that shortness of breath, heart rate, all of that.
Yeah, actually what I was saying, what kept coming up in my head was it allows them to be like removed from it, which wasn't really quite what I wanted to say, but it does, it creates a space where they can get out of the overwhelm and look at it and know what they know. Because when we're stuck in the fight, flight, or freeze, we can't like know what we know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What else? Do you have another one, or you want me to carry on with this list?
Well, one that's really cool, the two that's more of a physical thing that we were talking about, which gives the deep pressure input as well, is you can be like, okay, help me move this wall, and actually go to a wall in your house or somewhere and put your hands up and have them put their hands up and stand farther away from the wall to where you actually have to push really hard, like you would be pushing like a heavy bookcase or like a wagon full of like sandbags or something, like you're really pushing into it.
So push on something that's not going to move.
Exactly.
So we don't accidentally fall over.
Right.
Or perhaps, and I'm just going to point this out because it seems like something I would do. Don't do it while standing on a slippery surface, because I might push so hard and then have my feet slip out from under me. I can so see that happening. So make sure the bookshelf, don't push on a bookshelf. You don't want it to fall over. Don't stand on slippery tile.
So it helps relieve like the tensions in the and the emotions that are locked in the like the joints and the muscles. But the other thing you can do with that is you can like stand away from the wall. It's like do wall push-ups to where you fall into the wall with your hands open, and it's giving you that deep pressure. Or you can also use like resistance bands or like TheraBands. And they put like that big rubber band, but you get to pull on it and stretch it out. Just don't let it snap back on your face. Just kidding. So that's like, help me move the wall. All right.
Yeah.
Next.
So that ticks two boxes because it gives you all the physical proprioceptive information, but it also is a game.
Yeah.
And then for those of you out there who have kids who like the comic books and read a lot of comics or the graphic novels, what does your thought bubble say? Right? So the thought bubbles help move the story along in the graphic novels and in the comics. So, but the thought bubbles also work such that, again, it allows them to talk about how they're feeling as like a third party observer. Can't speak today. So that allows them to gain perspective. Again, it allows them to step outside of it, take a look in, and like get some information about what's going on, get clarity.
And if a kid likes to draw or scribble or anything like that, you can also draw up like the thought bubbles, like with characters, and have them, even if they're not writing, they can write it out, or they can actually just use like different symbols or something that they put in them that it represents how they're feeling, and let it keep changing. And you could put it in a little book, and then you know how you have like a little paper book and you flip through it really fast like a comic, like, and it like moves.
Yeah. No, but that's another good one really, is like, okay, you're right, for the kids who like maybe don't read those things or aren't going to think like that, then like draw me a picture of draw me a story, draw me a story, you know, and that's another great way. Again, it involves the physical, you know, they like to do that.
And it gets it out too, and it allows you to talk about like what's in there, because so many times that's what they were talking about, like with the anxiety, it shows up in like dreams, like nightmares and stuff. And sometimes if you can get that out on paper or something,
yeah,
and then talk about it, then that nightmare can dissipate.
Yeah. And then another one that we really like is this a big problem or a little problem?
Yeah. Is it a mountain or is it a molehill?
Yeah. So basically, as anxiety mounts, we turn a molehill into a mountain. So by looking at how big is this problem really, it helps break it back down
into the littler steps.
Yeah.
to make it more, and then it makes it more manageable to where you're doing one little thing. But also for kids, it's awesome to put like a numeric thing to it, like on a scale of 1 to 10. Is this a big mountain or is this a molehill? Is it a big problem or a little problem? And then be like 10 would be like the mountain, the big problem. The 1 would be, no, it's just a little problem. And then when they can identify, okay, maybe this is really actually a 5. Okay, so what do we need to do to bring it down to a 1?
Yeah.
So those are all, we mentioned several different things. So maybe we can get that in the show notes.
Yeah, I have one other too that I think for like slightly, and the last one really is, if you gave your feeling a color, what would it be? Again, for like, you know, you could use that in place of the monster. It's basically a different version of the monster question. And then you can ask, you know, why, follow up with why is your feeling that color? What does that color mean to you? You know, you feel that depending on that question might work better than the monster question for some people, or whatever.
It's actually a really cool question, and everybody's different and every child is different. But I have had several kids that I've worked with who actually perceive people by color. Like they actually get a color of a person, and it tells them, it gives them that guidance of how they need to react or be with that person. I wouldn't say react, but like to be with them. Like a yellow is like a like somebody who's more calming type of thing. There's like, and that's not for every kid. Every kid has their own color.
But everyone creates their own like color scale, right? Like what pink means to me means something different to you, means something different to the next person.
But it does sometimes help with like, so especially if you're dealing with like a really empathic or an aware, highly sensitive child, that does kind of help. And really, truly with all of this, the name of the game is the goal isn't to truly like eliminate the anxiety, but to help the child manage it. Because you got to help them learn to tolerate when they start to have anxiety or feel anxiety and function. Because if you really like always remove them from every given situation where they might have anxiety, you're showing that as a coping method and not allowing them to actually begin to manage and realize what tools and techniques that they need to work through it.
Yeah, actually, that's interesting because I just listened to someone speak, and they were speaking about mindfulness actually, but you just basically said a version of what he was saying. Is he's essentially was saying that the goal can't be to be never in that circumstance, to never experience that stress and anxiety or that panic. The goal is to recognize it and then have the steps to have ease with it. Because realistically, we live in a world where you're never going to achieve the goal of just being in your house, and never, you know, the goal I should say of never being in any sort of like stressful or panic or anxiety inducing scenario. So the key really is to help them have ease and work through it, not eliminate it.
Yes, and by helping them work through it and manage it, the byproduct of that is actually that anxiety will begin to decrease or fall away over time.
Right. Eventually, you probably will eliminate it. But it's like, if that's the goal, you can't get there. It has to be a happy accident of the rest of it.
Yeah. So we'll put some of those phrases and tips and tools in our show notes. So feel free to check it out. And if you guys have any questions or anything else that you would like us to talk about, any topics, please let us know. Put it in, comment on the shows at YouTube or on iTunes, and we would appreciate that.
And that's it. We will see you next week talking about something else fun and new.
All right. Have a great week, guys.
See everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the show.
Our target is to make your awareness easy to use and to acknowledge the power of not fitting in.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our channel on YouTube and share it with someone you know.
Why fit in when you were born to stand out?
Embrace your difference. Join the Misfit Squad.